It's cold here. I'm going to warm you up with some knowledge. Matt Waldman joining us. He of the Rookie Scouting Portfolio has created that. You can order that at mattwaldmanrsp.com. I have my copy for this here. Drops April 1st. We're into April. Matt, good morning. Congratulations on another comprehensive edition, and thanks for joining us.
Hey, it's always a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So, before maybe people that aren't familiar with you, the Rookie Scouting Portfolio, you've been putting it together since 2006. Your process and who this benefits, who would be interested in this?
Sure. So the Rookie Scouting Portfolio is one of the two most purchased draft guides for cross-referencing purposes for NFL decision makers and scouts, according to college recruiters I talked to, like Alex Brown over at Ole Miss, who used to be the recruiting director at SMU and Rice, and before that with Tom Herman at Houston. So it's been around for 20 years. It's specifically centered around quarterback, running back, wide receiver, and tight end. And so I have a fair amount of scouts who read the book for cross-referencing purposes. But if you're a football fan and you're looking for just really in-depth scouting reports that show the process for how I grade players and how I define everything that I grade, and do it in an entertaining way so that you can see how these players differ from each other within the class, but also within the past 3 years of classes, this book is going to be something that you're going to really enjoy, because you can look at these players 2, 3 years, 4 years from now and see what the original reports say. So when they move around the league a little bit and find a better fit, you can see how that works out. So it's also great for fantasy football because, I'm a senior staff writer of Football Guys. So what I decided to do was to make this, in one part, kind of a football-approved type of process for scouting that's also used a lot by fantasy players for, rookie drafts, for their redraft leagues when they're looking at rookie talents, and you can see how much more these guys are having an impact each year. And this book is also something where, I've provided scouting reports for a variety of coaches who work with players around the league, including Will Hewlett, with quarterback coach for Brock Purdy before the draft. He worked with him and used my scouting reports as a basis for beginning film study and work with him individually. Same with Caleb Williams and Anthony Richardson. So that's kind of like the audience type of what goes on here. And so it's a lot of those guys in media. And so I'm that guy. I would put it this way. You got the star guys in big draft who are like, wearing the suits and the front-facing people. They're like the pop musicians. I'm like the studio musician who's playing behind them.
Very good. I mean, going through it, I've started to dig into it. One of the ways I like that you present things, and we'll get into this draft, is, I'm going through the running backs, I'm going through the receivers, and in part because, we're here in Buffalo, we're not thinking that much about running back or tight end or quarterback, receiver we'll get to. But from a fantasy standpoint, like you said, I've got some high picks. I got to know which running backs I want to take my flyers on. And I like how one of the things you do for each position is you take a trait, something about the players, and then rank them star caliber, starter caliber. Ashton Ginty is a star caliber in this, and maybe he's not a star caliber at some of the other skill sets. It's a great way to get a look at what type of player you're talking about, whether it's a running back, receiver, quarterback, and on.
Yeah, and one of the great things about the way that I do this, if I'm going to brag about it a little bit, is that, the guys who you're going to be listening to a lot in media, their job is very much predicated on talking to people in the NFL to determine where these guys are going to get drafted, and then add their talent thoughts on these players combined with draft capital, and they do that, before the draft. I decided to create this document by saying I don't want to do that because there's too much risk management filtered into scouting reports pre-draft, because GMs and owners either want to sell tickets, they want to sell merchandise. That's where they get a lot of money, and they So there's a lot of about who's the safest of the talented picks in the early rounds. So sometimes it's not a true look at talent. So what I like to do is my pre-draft, it's very much an unvarnished look at talent. So you're going to see players who may not get drafted or who are drafted late that I say, this Isaiah Pacheco is probably a much earlier round value as a talent who's going to get drafted much later. Or that I like Nick Chubb better than Saquon Barkley, even though we know Saquon Barkley is going to get drafted in the first round. Things like that. And then I have a post-draft that comes out a week after the NFL draft, and that's when I start looking at fit and determining, well, you know what, Ladd McConkey's probably going to have a better year earlier in his career than Marvin Harrison Jr. because of the weaknesses that Marvin Harrison Jr. has as a pass catcher paired up with a Kyler Murray compared to the offense that, Ladd McConkey's going to be in that has really led with their slot receiver, in Baltimore and then in San Francisco before that. And so I start combining that information because why look at talent if I'm just going to say, well, this is what the NFL wants to do, but that's more about fit talent and risk management, because there's certain guys that have great talent, but that maybe there's some off-field stuff or they had an injury and they ding those guys.
Matt Waldman, Rookie Scouting Portfolio, joining us on the Western Hotline. All right, let's get to some of the receivers, and then I'm going to get your thoughts on the backs and the quarterbacks. But for receiver, in Buffalo, we spent a lot of time last year and the last couple of years talking about receiver. Keon Coleman ends up being the pick. I want to get your thoughts on him quickly, and then ask you if they're looking for speed, horizontal, vertical speed. That's something we hear the Bills talk about. How do you like rounds 2, 3, 4 to get somebody to fill that role in Buffalo's offense?
Well, I love that. I think that this is a good draft for the Bills' needs, mainly because there's not a guy in this class, or there are very few guys in this class who really project to be that classic X receiver who's really fast and really big. But at the same time, you have a lot of guys who do a great job working longer horizontal breaking routes, who can then use their speed, to be able to get yards after the catch, or guys who can do a little bit of everything. And certainly with the Bills, it seems like that's the profile they're looking for a lot of these talents. And there's a little bit of everything in this class if you're not looking for, the next Brian Thomas Jr. Okay, so that, from that standpoint, I like what I see there. And with Keon Coleman, I think that for them, using him as kind of an inside-out option or occasionally as a guy that you can use on the outside to win contested catches, I think that there's still a lot of promise there for him. And I think that it's going to be fun to see how his career develops. And we saw some high points with him, and I think we're going to continue to see him build on that. He's a smart player. He's a good player after the catch. He was one of my favorites when you just look at what the potential is with his game. Overall, I think the Bills are in a good spot, but if they can get an explosive player who can stretch the field with his speed, and maybe open things up a little bit more underneath, but you can also use him in similar ways so that you'd use Khalil Shakir or Keon Coleman. I think you're just adding more to the mix that allows the field to be open for a variety of players, and it seems like that's what they want to do here.
How do you feel like Isaiah Bond would fit into that role? He's someone that has visited with the Bills, one of their top 30 visits. You see him in the second round a lot. He said he was going to break the 40 record at the Combine. He did not. But Brandon Beane's been on the record before that he almost likes that it sometimes can knock their draft process or their draft stock, and he likes trusting in the tape. So Bond specifically, and maybe anybody else that would be in the middle range. Because, Matt, I don't really think first round that's on the table for them, but this is one player that we've been talking about for the second round.
I love Isaiah Bond. He's one of my top 5 receivers in this class if you're not looking at anything off the field. And I know there's some rumblings off the field about just maturity on certain levels. Is it as bad as what we saw with Jermaine Burton? I don't know. Usually those types of things, there's such a wide range of how scouts determine whether a player is going to be an off-field issue or have a professionalism issue, and oftentimes their ability to do so has as much variation as teams have the ability to judge talent. So, you know, with that said, if we're presuming that everything's okay and that this guy's going to continue to mature into a good professional, Bond is the only player in this class where you can look at him really with the neck, you know, without really, you could look at him on a cursory level and go, this dude has juice. I mean, this is a guy that when he catches the ball, that acceleration is palpable. He reminds me a lot of like T.Y. Hilton, which you guys who you're very familiar with back in the day, who could give you that wide receiver one type of skill set in a smaller frame. He is a smooth route runner who attacks vertically in his stems on routes that break back to the quarterback. You see a lot of young receivers who don't exhibit that level of aggression to really use their speed as a bully pulpit to get separation. His breaks are strong. The route game is probably one of the strengths of his game overall. And, you know, there's some minor things with catch point issues on targets that may be a little bit away from his frame in certain places, but they're not rampant problems in terms of him catching the football. He makes some tough catches. He uncovers late for his quarterback, which, you know, with Josh Allen, you want to be able to have, when you have a dynamic quarterback, you want to have a receiver who can be on the same page and also can create with the ball in the air, and also create while the quarterback is on the move. And Bond offers all of that, plus the ability to use them, you know, out of the backfield when you're motioning your receiver across. I think he's, you know, I think it's very easy. You can very easily look at him and think that, you know, if he improves just a couple of small details, he could be one of the 2 to 3 best receivers in this class. And it wouldn't surprise me if he turns out to be the best. So, yeah, I'm a big fan of Isaiah Bond.
Matt Waldman joining us on the Western Hotline. The tight end position, I want to dig there a little bit. The Bills, of course, I think they're set at tight end. They got Dawson Knox. They drafted Dalton Kincaid 2 years ago. We're still kind of waiting for that to show up in the production department. This is a class I've seen with 2 kind of top guy tight ends. And I wonder, Matt, your thoughts on the evolution of the position, how it's being used differently. When the Bills drafted Kincaid, there's the idea that he's a pass-catching tight end. Think of him like a receiver. And there are more and more of those guys in the league that do this. So from Kincaid to Bowers to the Penn State tight end or Colston Loveland, like this position as it evolves. And what are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, I mean it's kind of evolved from the Bill Belichick philosophy where he looked at it early on back when he was with Cleveland and said, you know, if you're going to draft a tight end early, you want him to have the potential to be a high-end receiver. We can get blockers later, and we can get plenty of them to do that. And I think that that's the case because when you look at the tight end position, my co-host Adam Harstead and I on our podcast, we've often talked about that the all-around tight end, the Rob Gronkowski, is pretty much a unicorn because the demands of the position over a 17-game season to actually be a very strong inline blocker who can take on defensive ends and strong side linebackers on the front side of the run game and also be a guy who can match up with a cornerback is it's almost a myth because if you may get 1 or 2 really strong seasons out of a player who can do that, but you're going to get a lot of injuries outside of maybe, you know, 3 or 4 guys over the past 20, 30 years. So can you use tight ends in a way where some of them are more like H-backs and they can maybe block on the backside, or you can have them as a lead blocker and then have them, you know, run certain types of routes? Absolutely. There's a wide range of what you can deploy, but if you're looking for that classic idea that you're going to find a Rob Gronkowski type who can, you know, continue to stay relatively healthy throughout his career and put up that kind of extreme level of production, most of these guys get hurt. I mean, even look at like George Kittle as someone who may be a little bit on the closer side of that, and it's difficult. So it's difficult for him to stay healthy. So, I mean, really, you have to look at these players and determine. Some of them some of the rookies in this class give you some hints of where they could be an all-around player, but how much do you want to overtax a guy to perform that diverse of a level of skill sets that require, strength and a lot of physical contact, to also a ton of running and, cutting and doing the type of quick agility type of work. You kind of have to narrow the scope a little bit realistically towards one end or towards another. And that doesn't mean that you can't get a guy who might give you, 500 to 700 yards and 6 to 8 touchdowns, but also be a strong inline blocker. I think that makes sense. But if you're looking for that 1,200-yard receiver who's also an all-pro on the front side, who can be like a sixth offensive lineman for real, yeah, forget about that.
Matt Waldman, Rookie Scouting Portfolio. On the quarterbacks, before we let you go, Matt, how do you see it playing out? You've got some guys that could go in the top 5, 3 guys that could go in the top 5, I suppose. I'm seeing a little more Jackson Dart. I'm seeing a little more Jalen Milroe. It's not thought to be the class of last year, last couple seasons, but Cam Ward, Shedeur Sanders, is there talent here? Is there hope here for these teams hoping to pick early?
There is talent here. It's just the same story we've been seeing for many, many years, is that the NFL's recent hit rate for the first round is 38%. There's kind of a whiff of desperation, at closing time after happy hour, where they feel like if the guy even can give you some sort of first round trait, that they've got to take them, because based on their draft capital, nobody else hits. But also we have to remember that there is no quarterback development in the NFL. It's what they do outside of the team most of the time, where these guys really get most of their development. They're really getting coached to scheme and to what their weekly assignments are going to look like, their game plan is going to look like. And then maybe they get a little help from watching veterans in terms of the soft skills, the leadership, handling, the media pressure, working with their teammates and coaches, things like that, how they approach the work. But I would say this class, it's one of those classes where I'd say there's 12 players who I graded as having the potential to make active rosters, and that's pretty deep. The problem is that there's not 2 to 3 guys that you look at and you go, wow, if these are guys that maybe no matter what team they go to, and no matter how bad that team is, Chicago Bears, in terms of their organization and how they approach things, that the quarterback's going to be able to survive that. Caleb Williams was that guy last year. This year, I'm not sure there's really a guy who will survive an awful onslaught to a bad team that just doesn't have a clue about how to use that player early on, and they just say sink or swim. But I think if each of these guys that gets drafted at the top have some time to sit, you have a chance. I think, Cam Ward is certainly going to be the guy that people look at and say, oh, he could be a franchise caliber player. And there's a lot of good there, but I think that we have to temper it with there's certain hero ball management types of decisions that he has to exhibit in games that he's going to have to get better at. And there are still some things with accuracy in the middle of the field that can get a little bit better, in addition to the timing passing game. Because when you look at a lot of the RPO screen work he does, or just 4 verticals that go back there, footwork hasn't been drilled into him to be a timing passer on timing routes, and we're going to have to see how quickly he can adapt to that. Milroe, to me, is the best upside talent, because not even talking about the running. Yeah, he can run like Matt Forte in the open field. He's got that kind of speed and ability to bend around. But if you just subtract that from the equation, it's the same type of, the people are taking the same type of approach in the NFL as they have since Bill Polian back in the day, where that worked, 20, 30 years ago, but his outdated views on Lamar Jackson are kind of what the league is still, I would say 50 to 60% of the league at least, still views it like Bill Polian, that they want a guy who is more of like physically looks like Josh Allen, but without maybe the rushing upside. That's just kind of icing on the cake for them. So when you look at Milroe as a passer, what they're missing is that he's probably the best processor of information that's in this class when it comes to having to hold defenders in the middle of the field and manipulate them while you have legitimate pressure bearing down. He's got soft feet or quiet feet in the pocket where he can make those kind of small adjustments like Lamar Jackson can, and not have to do the dynamic Kyler Murray type of stuff where Murray basically creates more problems for his infrastructure when he's moving around the pocket. It's exciting on ESPN when he does it 2 or 3 times a game, but how many winning seasons has he had? How many high-end producers has he supported? And the answer would be not. I think he's one of the most overrated quarterbacks in the league when it comes to the things that need to get done. And Milroe's more of a guy that you could say that this is a guy who can operate well from the pocket, and he's much more discriminating about how he uses his legs. And I think that he's a guy that could develop into a Jalen Hurts type of player. He's just got to work a little bit on touch with certain types of throws, and continue to expand his repertoire with the playbook. But this is an academic Heisman winner. So, off the field, this kid's going to know how to prepare and be able to work at the game. And from what I've seen, what he translates to the field, he has a lot of evidence of developing the craft that a lot of these guys don't really ever get. Shedeur Sanders is kind of like the safest of the guys. You look at him and you'd say he's someone that you feel like he's seen a lot because he's the son of a celebrity who maybe leads, is still kind of the guy in the front, in the limelight. And I think he's seen a lot good and bad from that. And he's a steady player, but he's one of those players that you look at and say, is he going to be a Josh Allen type? Never. I doubt that seriously. But can he be a Geno Smith type, or maybe a Baker Mayfield or Tua Tagovailoa type who, with a great infrastructure, you can win games and get to the playoffs? Yeah, I think he could develop into that. Beyond that, Dart, to me, he's got to learn how to be accurate beyond 25 yards. I've charted a lot of his games, and he's great in the short game, but after 25 yards, it's a big question mark. Some of it's footwork, but a lot of it is everything's set up well from a mechanic standpoint, and he's still scattershot in that range. So he may have to be a scheme fit. Maybe the player that I would say just after that is just the most interesting to me is Curtis Rourke out of Indiana, who led them to a playoff appearance this year, and he did it with an ACL tear, playing through an ACL tear that he suffered in August, and it was the second tear of his ACL. And when you look at his play, he's the guy that I would look at and go, he's the most likely to be like that Brock Purdy type if you give him a year to heal and he gets a chance to compete, or something happens where he gets an opportunity to play, because he's very good in the pocket. He has good downfield accuracy. Obviously, he's as tough as nails because it was revealed in January that he was playing with a torn ACL, and you wouldn't have thought it when you watched him last year.
Matt Waldman on the Western Hotline. Matt, the website, mattwaldman.com or mattwaldmanrsp.com?
I think we found both.
Joe and I found both. So which is
mattwaldman.com is where you can buy directly. RSP is where you can see some of my work.
Gotcha. All right, very good. Comprehensive and very valuable for anybody out there that's interested. Thanks, Matt.
Hey, it's my pleasure. Thank you.
All right. I downloaded the guide. I'm going to be drafting so many running backs based on his breakdowns. He's going to dominate my fantasy league. You're in Dynasty.
I was going to say, I'm kind of not happy now that I don't have any picks anywhere because I traded them all.
Yeah.
Sounds like a pretty good class.
Going to dominate. And then when I'm up at the podium accepting my trophy, I'd like to thank Matt Waldman. Mm-hmm. Thank Matt Harmon as well.
List them on the site as like amateur scouts. Yeah, professional scouts.